So today's topic that I want to look at is something different from the usual presentation that I've made in the regulatory symposium and other events, mainly looking at what are the aspects that we've digitalized and how we operate digitalized systems. Today we will look at what did we learn from digitalizing processes? What are the pros and cons of digitalization from a different perspective? And also, what are the difficulties and challenges that you would face when you digitalize your systems? And this can vary depending upon what setup you're using, what kind of tools you're using, what kind of platforms you're using, and the selection of these processes really makes a lot of difference to how effectively the systems would work. An ideal scenario for us is looking at how do you want to see the products? And we have an ideal dream in our mind, which tells you that we need to see farm to fork visibility for products. And we need to know the processes, we need to know how the temperatures were, we need to know how the plant was, and we need to know the nutritional facts, we need to know what the customer should be doing before the product is used, after the product is used, and any other information about product pricing. Everything has to be on the label. And that's your ideal scenario. And we wish that the technology enables us to do all these things in one small QR code that you often see, or a barcode. And that's something which we have in your mind. And when you look at the food chain, you have all this information coming in, and these are just headlines. I mean, if you look at the actual data of a single product, you have actually maybe 100 times more than this in terms of volume for each product. And are we able to get all this in digitalized format? Probably yes. They are possible, and that is possible, and that is already digitalized in some format or the other, stuck in some computers, stuck in some machines somewhere else in the world. But the difficult thing sometimes is that, am I not on the screen? Okay. The difficult thing sometimes is that when you digitalize these processes or these data sets, we also need to define who will have access to it and who will not have access to it, and also look at how we will interpret the data for utility. So let's look at where are these in most cases. And we know that they are stored up in shelves somewhere, right? This is the pre-digitalization state. And over a period of time, we have managed to digitalize part of it. And probably some of the countries would be, or some of the companies would have managed to digitalize it at least to 80 to 90% level. And if you look at Dubai's journey, we started our digitalization in 2002 with our food inspection program. Then the trade processes were digitalized at the same time, pretty much, not the full documentation, but the processes were digitalized at least within the team. And then we look at 2007, we started looking at product registration, then laboratory test reports in 2007. 2012, we started looking at label registration and assessment. And in 2018, we started looking at digitalizing food safety management system. And these are programs that are used by food businesses, like temperature records and training records and cleaning records, contracts. All these were digitalized. And currently, we are in the process of launching our revised edition of the 2004 program, and probably 2012 program as well for trade and label registration. So it's a constant evolution, and we keep changing with technology being available. And if you look at the digital framework, literally almost everything has been digitalized within the country, within the process, and it's almost all paperless. And this could be registration of products, registration of companies, services, actions, and daily checks of food businesses. Literally, I think if you look at if there is something not digitalized, I think at least we know that everything is possible. Maybe some documents are still on paper, but they can be digitalized. And when you look at a digitalization project, the things that come into your mind first is probably the app, because those are the most popular things. And if you look at the face of a digitalized program in any government or any company or any product, you always think about apps. And apps, probably from a management perspective, are the least of the concern from the development, because they're very easy to make and very easy to get going. And You also are familiar with the front end or the interface that you interact with. So these are typically, where you log in, where you find your contacts, where you find your information, where you edit your information. And these are like an Excel sheet with a lot of tables and a lot of fields. And when you work with your team, you're constantly, discussing this with your users on how this can be improved. Like, how do you input data faster? How do you make sure that the data is clean? And how do you make sure the search is available? How do you give support? Most of this is delivered through the front interface. And then there's also something else that we see as users is either reports that you generate from systems or visualizations that are created for you by the development team. So the team tells you that, okay, what do you want to see? And you say, oh, I want to look at all the best incidents in the city. And then they will create your visualizations for you. But that comes from somewhere else. It comes from a data source that is given by somebody, but not readable unless it is visualized in this particular way. And when you look at inspections, for instance, when you look at it from an inspector's point of view, you see an app with a list of questions that comes in when they select a particular option or a particular checklist. But when you look at the back end of the data, you see it like this, where you can see where are the problems, what are the trends, what kind of violations are popping up in January, what do you see during lean months, what do you see in summer, what do you see in winter, which inspector is marking more violations, which inspector is marking less violations, what kind of businesses have problems, what kind of solutions can be also drawn from those problems. So those are all coming from your visualization of your inspections. But my desktop looks like this when I look at a certain project. So this is just the football project, and we've got other projects like this. In my desktop, what you see are folders with information. Sorry. Clicker. All right. So in my folder, what you see is not interfaces, not apps, but programs that are essential for us, that are kind of instrumental in creating these. Sorry, why am I talking? Okay, it should open my folder. You have to do it. Yeah, just play it. Right. So this is how it looks. Every version is denoting a month, and every month we have a new version that's launched for the application or platform. And then each one of those applications would have a BRS requirement that goes to your IT development team, and the business analyst sits with you, looks at what are the requirements, what are the changes you want, what are the requirements you want to be completely new, how do you want to modify the previous one, and these go in cycle. And every month you're literally producing 3 or 5 of these documents, which are 50 to 100 pages long. And each team works on all these aspects, looking at how does the interface look like, how should the user see it, how should the business see it, how should the management see it, how should the data center see it, and also you need to convince the the development team that this is how it should work, and it is not necessary that they would know what you're talking about. So this is the challenge that you always have, and I want to kind of show you what are those tips that I can offer from our experience. It's very personal sometimes to me, so I don't want to take it as a generic tip, but I would really highlight from my experience what are those issues that we often find, and what are those issues that you would want to address as you build programs. So me go to point number 1, and what do you need first? What you need first is a multidisciplinary team. And it's like music. And when you're looking at building a technology platform, it's like how you build music, a song or a band. You have to have teams that are very, very diverse in skills. And here, we tend to look at this product like an IT solution. These are not IT solutions, it's a business solution, where you have to take into account how the importance of the customer, importance of the user, importance of understanding. Even within the IT framework, you need to know whether you have an expertise in certain processes. For instance, Do you have experts in the IT team who can understand what you're talking about from a business? Like, do they understand food safety? Do they understand nutrition? Do they understand what your processes mean to public? Because if they do not know what it means to you, that could be problematic in setting up the system. And in your team, you should have people who understand IT systems, because then you can anticipate problems. So when you give a business requirement, you also need to know how the data structure would be working. Because if you do not know how the data structure works, then you might add on complications to the system, which could finally end up slowing down your system or causing errors. So always try to be as diverse as possible when it comes to utilizing or when it comes to designing the project. And then you need to treat your IT team like they're setting a banquet with very diverse menus, very diverse customer requirements. And even within the IT team, you need to see the chefs who can prepare a lot of different types of dishes. Like, the same person does not cook your main course and the desserts. Like you would have a baker, you would have a steak specialist. So the same way, IT team also has specialties, and they have people who are very good in building the front end. There are people who are very good in the backend solution, data solution. Some of them are good in data analysis. Some of them are good in data visualization. And all these expertise is required to build the system. And it's not simply IT department. And if we don't get that straight, we have issues later coming up. Technology tools matter. And here, it may not be directly relevant to us when we are asking the IT department, I want the solution. But I would really recommend you to go back and read about how do these applications get built. So these are called platform or app building solutions. And just to give you an example, like .NET, Mendix, these are terms that you would come in when you start digging. What are these platforms built on? And this is not meant to be giving an answer that this platform is better than the other. I just took it as an illustrative example. In the IT field, people always talk about what's the best platform to use for an app or a web-based solution. So depending on what your needs are, the IT team would select a particular tool. And it's important that you give at least a high-level overview of all the aspects that you need to deal with in the beginning, get them to understand before signing up for a particular platform. Because if you are stuck with certain platforms, you could eventually face consequences when you add on services which are not related. Say, for instance, you would start off by entering the data of food products, and suddenly you want to have an instant messenger that works and communicates with the team that is utilizing the data to increase the efficiency. You may not be able to do that if that platform doesn't have that facility. So always invest a bit of time in learning about how these platforms are built. And it is not necessary that you need to do that, but you need to have a team member who can understand that from their perspective. And also think about how much time do you have to deliver that product. And we need to think about that race in our head, that do I want to deliver this product immediately with all the services, or should I consider it like a marathon where I take a very, very long journey, and I need to really plan it for a long journey, because it's quite different from going for a 100 meters dash where everything is over in 10 seconds. So here you need to really plan your fuel. You know, how am I going to sustain my running for 2 hours is what he would be looking at. I'll be planning for like 10 hours if I want to run the marathon. So depending on your resources, your abilities, you need to really plan your running. And you need to keep milestones and time limits in a split manner. And earlier slide, I showed you how our milestones are kept. So every month we have a release, and that's the Agile method. And if you go with an Agile methodology, you need to really plan your resources also in that manner, because it's spent over a period of time. So that's really important. And if you want to look at Agile and Waterfall methods, again, something really important and interesting to read. Olden days, and when I say old, it's like 5 years ago, you would use a waterfall method. So you call the IT company, you give a list of resources, a list of questions, and tell them, I want a solution that addresses all these things. I've seen an app somewhere, build it for me. The IT team goes, takes all your requirements in one go, builds a solution, comes back after 1 year or 6 months, whatever the pace is, and delivers your product. You test it and you say that, oh, this is not working. This is not my requirement anymore, because my regulations changed. I want a different regulation. My sampling plan has changed, or my training plan has changed. I don't want to use this, but I want to modify this. Now they will tell you, this is a new requirement. this is not what I produced because you gave me a different requirement 1 year ago. And that's quite normal. Things change. And post-pandemic, we do not know how many things change in our system. I mean, probably it's a complete turnaround of certain systems. So here, we need to be careful about building a waterfall method where you would build and deliver a product in one straight line. And what you probably want to look at is agile methodology where you constantly develop. So your deliveries are split in months or by months. You have a delivery of a service, but you start delivering quite early. So you have milestones kept all throughout. So you develop over a 5-year period of time. And each month you would launch a service. Say, for instance, today I would launch a service for a street food business. Tomorrow I would launch a service for communication between the businesses. Next month I would launch a service which enables me to provide a particular service for an applicant. So you keep building over time, and that way you can build your resources and optimize your resources. And actually, the IT department or the IT team that you will involved in are quite familiar with these things. Except that we do not know how they build, so we might end up giving them a requirement, we're telling that I want this product. So I think it's strongly recommended to read about agile methodologies and see how you can utilize that in your thinking. And expectations also link to customers. So when you're building such a long schedule, you have to prepare your customers for these things too, because speed and swiftness and accuracy doesn't come in the first month when you're building like this. It builds over time. And look at artificial intelligence, for instance. You cannot put a self-driving car on the street tomorrow and say, start driving. It doesn't work like that. It has to learn from its experience. So a self-driving car gets used to what is around its environment. So if you're putting it in UK, in London street, it's quite different from how it would drive in Dubai, because it's actually learning from what's going on around it. And that needs data. And that data is what makes the drive more accurate. In the same way, customer expectations also constantly change, and you have to constantly evolve over a period of time. And often, customer expectations are divided into two. One is how do they see and compare your systems versus how the utility of the system is. And when they see the system, they're thinking that it's Google and Facebook, which these are companies that have multi-billion dollars or trillions of dollars in their pocket to spend. So they would design amazing interfaces that are really, really fast. But you are not working in that budget, so you might be going with an interface that is slightly slower. And customers are immediately responding by saying that, oh, I want it to be downloading these things in 5 seconds. But what you need to remind these customers is, go back and look at what we were doing in the past. We were not riding Ferraris to deliver these services. You actually had to go to an office and produce a document to get an approval, for instance. Instead of that, today, you don't go to an office, you provide certain information online, and then you get the information processed virtually. So you're saving the time that you were going to the office, which could be 4 hours or 6 hours, plus the traffic, plus the vehicle fuel, the probability of you getting stressed out because you have to go to the office. And it's all reduced to like 5 minutes probably if you have a slow internet. But why do we compare the 5 minutes with 5 seconds that you get from Google? We don't utilize that thinking, but what we think is that our interface has to work in split seconds. So it's also about telling consumers and customers constantly that you have to get used to it. We will definitely speed up the process, but it takes time because the data gets mature over time. And as the data gets mature, and as the system gets mature, we will be able to deliver speedy services. And we always see the signboards when metro is built, right? You have a traffic jam before, everything is stuck because you're trying to change the road. And then you say, oh, we have a happy ending coming soon. Roads will be much more better when the metro work is finished. The same way, we need to keep telling them we are building over 5 years. You will have your expectations different, but then customers also increase their expectations over time. But that's why constant engagement is important. So keep talking to them all the time and kind of reassure them and also educate them on the limitations of the systems too. And when you work on data sets like this, when you build big systems, especially if you look at what we've built in Dubai, where we have digitalized everything, you've got plenty of data coming in. And you need to really look at what is the data that is really important for me or critical for me. And then you need to use that data for decision making. But don't try to use every data that you have for decision making. Now, we have businesses coming and asking us, how many times should I take the temperature of the chicken? And that's not something that we would answer, but we would ask them the question, how many of your suppliers of high-risk foods have a D or E grade, which is not really a good food safety system to follow? So they have both, they have access to both data. They know what is the product temperature or the receiving temperature of certain products, but they also have the data of performance of their suppliers. And I would tell them that the performance of your suppliers is more significant than the temperature data. That's not saying that the temperature data is not valuable, but it's important to know that some data could have a high value. So that is something really, really important. So sometimes you might need a lot of data to analyze to see the trends. Say, for instance, we want to look at the sampling resource for last 10 years. That will show you the trends. In some cases, you don't need to go that long term. You might use a short-term trend analysis to see post-pandemic what happened. That's only 1 year's data, right? So you might have to use the data, but don't get obsessed with a lot of quantity of data. It's not necessary to have a lot of quantity to make decisions. Balance it with quality. And then there is an obsession with paperlessness often. And when we look at systems, a lot of people ask you, are you paperless? So the drive for digitalization is not a drive for saving paper or saving the environment alone, because digitalization doesn't really mean that it's environmental friendly. Your screens consume a lot of time and a lot of energy, because to switch on your computer, take the data, every time you want the data, it's energy consuming. You need to store the data somewhere. Your servers have to work. It's like producing Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not visible to you, but it takes enormous amount of energy to produce the Bitcoin and keep it in the circulation. So same way, all these transactions that you want to show and prove also need energy. So questions like this, how much does it take to print the paper? Probably 10 fills, and there is an environmental cost to it. But if I put the same thing on a wall for like 2 years, I'm also spending energy to keep it live, keep it on a self stream. So there is energy to all these things. So it is not paperlessness that we're talking about here. We're talking about the value of the data here. So always remember that the drive is not for paperlessness. It is to create value from digitalization by utilizing the data. And if that data value cannot be created, digitalizations do not have much meaning. So that's really something that I would really emphasize. And this is something I've been talking about of late, probably the last 1 year or so, because that's something which we realize when we see a lot of data coming in and we're looking at how the industry is perceiving it as. It's easy to tell the companies remove the paper and utilize the system. It increases adoption rates, but on the other hand, it doesn't really create the value that is necessary. So that's the 8th habit that I wanted to show. It's not like there is a lot, but I think we have to constantly share. And before the session started, I was telling Gaga that we need to constantly talk and engage with team members who work in technology arena, so that we exchange ideas and share our expertise. And that's when we learn. So I'm just sharing my experience here. It's very personal, and it's not meant to be an organization's representation. So I thought it's important to highlight those. So end of the day, what are we working for? We are working towards sustainable goals. And our mission is to create sustainability in our system. So whatever we do, end of the day, it has to connect with the goals of the world or the larger population to make sure that our food safety systems are safe, secure, healthy, and also affordable for people. So technology should be a tool and an enabler. Sometimes it might be a lot more cheaper to use a paper and finish off the job. But if we really want to create value, we need to really invest time on learning about how we can create value. And you do not need data specialists to do this job for you. You don't hire data specialists to give you this kind of an insight about what your system can deliver. And my recommendation is that every one of you have to be a data scientist in the future, because that's the fundamental when it comes to food safety. If we do not understand data, it's very difficult to move our jobs, because if you do not know how to analyze it, your decisions are likely to be wrong. And if you want to analyze it, you want to have the best quality data from the best quality source that is possible. And then you have to have a multidisciplinary team, as I said earlier, who can make better decisions out of this data. Thank you, Ever. And as I mentioned, I won't be available for the Q&A, so I would prefer to take the questions early on. if that's possible.
And since we are running a bit late, unfortunately.